Hello everyone, this is Jenny, and today I will discuss the 4 communicative competence by Canal and Swain, and that is under the sociological foundation of language. And after that, I will discuss the models of communicative competence. So allow me to read the stand and the point of Canal and Swain in communicative competence. Let's start. Canal and Swain in 1980 and 1983 understood communicative competence as a synthesis of an underlying system of knowledge and skill needed for communication. In their concept of communicative competence, knowledge refers to the conscious or unconscious knowledge of an individual about language and about other aspects of language use. According to them, there are 3 types of knowledge. First, knowledge of underlying grammatical principles. Second, knowledge of how to use language in a social context in order to fulfill communicative functions. And third, knowledge of how to combine utterances and communicative functions with respect to discourse principles. In addition, their concepts of skill refers to how an individual can use the knowledge in actual communication. According to Canale, skill requires a further distinction between underlying capacity and its manifestation in real communication, that is to say, in performance. The nature of communicative competence is not static but dynamic. It is more interpersonal than intrapersonal and relative rather than absolute. It is also largely defined by context. As to the distinction between competence and performance, it is also referred to competence as an underlying ability and to performance as an open manifestation of competence. Competence can be observed, developed, maintained, and evaluated only through performance. The term communicative competence is comprised of 2 words, the combination of which means competence to communicate. This simple lexico-semantical analysis uncovers the fact that the central word in the syntagm communicative competence is the word competence. Competence is one of the most controversial terms in the field of general and applied linguistics. Its introduction to linguists' discourse has been generally associated with Chomsky, who in his very influential book titled Aspects of the Theory of Syntax drew what has been today viewed as a classic distinction between competence, or the monolingual speaker-listener's knowledge of language, and performance, the actual use of language in real situations. The bottom line is communication in a real situation, meaning to say the communication is observed when it is being used, or a person is communicating with another person, and that is the actual communication and where the communication or the actual communication happens. So now let's have the models of communicative competence according to Canale and Swain. The easiness which the model of Canale and Swain can be applied is probably the main reason why many researchers of communicative competence still use it. Communicative competence in 1980, the applied linguists Canale and Swain published an influential article in which they argued that the ability to communicate required four different sub-competencies. And what are those 4 sub-competencies? These are grammatical competency, social-linguistic competency, discourse competency and strategic competency. Now, we're going to discuss each competency according to Canale and Swain. So let's begin first with grammatical competence. So what is grammatical competence all about? In Canale and Swain in 1980 to 1981, grammatical competence is mainly defined in terms of Chomsky's linguistic competence, which is why some theoreticians whose theoretical and or empirical work on communicative competence was largely based on the model of Canale and Swain use the term linguistic competence for grammatical competence. According to Canale and Swain, grammatical competence is concerned with mastery of linguistic code. And these are the verbal or non-verbal, which includes vocabulary knowledge as well as knowledge of morphological, syntactic, semantic, phonetic, and orthographic rules. This competence enables the speaker to use knowledge and skills needed for understanding and expressing the literal meaning of utterances. Grammatical competence is the ability to recognize and produce the distinctive grammatical structures of a language and to use them effectively in communication. Take note of the word effectively. The word or the language must be used effectively in communication. So therefore, a person must be a grammatical competent for him to be able to communicate well and effectively. Grammatical competence as defined by Noam Chomsky would include phonological competence. Grammatical competence focuses on command of the language code, including such things as the rules of word and sentence formation, meanings, spellings, and even pronunciation. So, what is the goal of grammatical competence according to Canale and Swain? Well, the goal is to acquire knowledge of an ability to use forms of expression that are grammatically correct and accurate. Grammatical competence acts to promote accuracy and fluency in second language production and increases in importance as the learner advances proficiency. So that is grammatical competence all about. The correctness and the accuracy of the language being used in communicating with other people in a real or actual scenarios or situations. Okay, moving on to the second communicative competence of Canale and Swain. So this is what we call the discourse competence. Canale of 1983 and 1984 described discourse competence as mastery of rules. Mastery of rules that determine ways in which forms and meanings are combined to achieve a meaningful unity of spoken or written text. So the goal here is to form a meaningful and united thoughts, wherein the spoken language and the written text are being expressed meaningfully. The unity of a text is enabled by cohesion in form and coherence in meaning. Cohesion is achieved by the use of cohesive devices. Example, pronouns, conjunctions, synonyms, parallel structures, etc., which help to link individual sentences and utterances to a structural whole. So meaning to say, the use of cohesion devices or transitional devices are very important in constructing meaningful sentences or utterances. The means of achieving coherence, for instance, repetition, regression, consistency, relevance of ideas, enable the organization of meaning, establish a logical relationship between groups of utterances. So in discourse competence, cohesion and coherence are very important in actual communication. So in coherence, it is all about the organization of the meaning or the language being uttered. So for us to have a discourse competence, we should be knowledgeable about cohesion and coherence. So that is the discourse competence in spoken or in written text. And now we have the third communicative competence, and this is the sociological competence. So what is sociological competence all about? So this is the ability to interpret the social meaning of the choice of linguistic varieties and to use language with the appropriate social meaning for communication situations. So it involves social, meaning to say it also develops relationship. So the role of social linguistic competence is to develop relationship among people who are communicating with each other. Social linguistic competence can be defined quite simply as knowing and understanding how to speak given the circumstances you are in. So to go into more detail, when we speak in our native language, we don't have to think about who we are talking to or how we should say something. Our words typically come naturally, right? And we don't even realize all the complexities that go into the process because we are used to utter the words in our native language. Although we often do not actively think about this process, it is an essential part of effective communication. In second language, the second language learners, on the other hand, must learn how to produce and understand language in different social-linguistic contexts. It's because we are not used to utter words using the second language. That's why we have to think of the words and terms which are appropriate in a given context or situation. And now, taking into consideration such factors as the status of participants, the purposes of interactions, and the norms of convention of interactions. This is something that language learners must be taught and given opportunities to practice because we really have to expose the learners, especially to the second language, because they really have to express themselves using the second language, specifically if there are people who are using the second language. So that learner, a certain learner, must to learn the second language for him to be able to express himself in the use of second language. For to have the communication as well and to develop social interaction and relationship with other people. So this includes but is not limited to expressing attitude or emotion, understanding formal versus informal, and knowing recognizing common slang or idiomatic expressions. So that is the third communicative competence, the social linguistic competence. So the bottom line is the communication process can build also relationship. So that learners can build rapport with other people using the language, specifically the second language. So a person must be social linguistic competent so that he or she can be able to express himself or herself in a meaningful way and to build relationship. So we are now in the last competence, communicative competence according to Canale and Swain, and this is the strategic competence. So here we are challenged on how to initiate conversation and how to sustain conversation. And sometimes we are the initiator of the topic, and sometimes we're merely the listeners. But in strategic competence, in the model of Canale and Swain, strategic competence is composed of knowledge of verbal and non-verbal communication strategies. What does it mean? That are recalled to compensate for breakdowns in communication due to insufficient competence in one or more competence of communicative competence. So meaning to say, before we achieve the strategic competence, we must be mastering first the grammatical competence, the discourse competence, and social linguistic competence for us to have the initiative to open conversation and for us to sustain the communication. And these strategies include paraphrase, circumlocution, repetition, reluctance, avoidance of words, structures or themes, guessing, changes of register and style, modifications of messengers. Canale pointed out that this competence can also be used to enhance the effectiveness of communication. In a qualitative sense, it is different from the other three components of communicative competence. So why and how come this certain competence differs from the other competencies? It is because in this type, it's not only a type of stored knowledge. That's right, and it includes non-cognitive aspects such as self-confidence, readiness to take the risk, etc. However, since it interacts with other components, it enables learners to deal successfully with a lack of competence in one of the fields of competence. So again, the strategic competence, this is where we think of things on how to open the communication with other people and how to understand them as well, and also how to sustain the communication process. So we think of some strategies to sustain the communication, and if we know how to strategize or to come up with a strategy in communication, we are using the strategic competence. Okay, so those are the models of communicative competence. So let's have the recap. First, communicative competence according to Canale and Swain is the grammatical competence. The second one is the discourse competence. And the third one is the social linguistic competence. And last is the strategic competence. So I hope you learned something from the very short discussion that we had today. And I'm pretty sure that you will be able to realize the importance of having communicative competence when it comes to communication. And that's all. And thank you for listening, and thank you for watching this video. God bless you, and see you next time. Bye.